Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Wednesday, July 24th, and the NFL season is just around the corner. Now all 32 NFL teams have reported to training camp. That does not mean, though, that every player for these teams are showing up to camp. And last night we got the news that Dallas Cowboys wide receiver CeeDee Lamb is amongst one of those who are planning to hold out amidst ongoing contract negotiations. So we're going to be diving into that situation specifically, as well as all of the other updates on contract holdouts or hold-ins in the case of a couple such as Jordan Love and Brandon Ayuk. So we'll be touching on those as well. Then we're going to be continuing on to preview all 32 NFL teams for the upcoming season. Today we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. Can Mike Tomlin elevate this group to yet another year of 500 or better football as he has the previous 17 years? We will answer that question. And then in the latter half of the show, we will be breaking down Paul Skeens' most recent start. Last night, he was able to pitch into the ninth inning for the first time of his career in the Pittsburgh Pirates' loss to the St. Louis Cardinals, but still a massively impressive feat for Paul Skeens, who just continues to shatter every expectation of him. So we're going to dive into his performance there. And then finally, we are going to end off the show by talking about the recent reports. We already covered that the NBA is planning this new media mega deal with it's Disney, Amazon Prime, and NBC, but TNT is scratching and clawing to try and keep themselves in the conversation. They have matched Amazon Prime's offer sheet, so we are going to be talking about whether or not we could see TNT retain these rights. So we're going to dive into all of that. But before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on all of the latest happenings in sports. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a tip or donation with a comment, your comment will pop up on screen for everybody to see. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. Like I mentioned, NFL training camps have now started for all 32 NFL teams, and we are getting some reports about different players who are holding out amidst contract negotiations, and Dallas Cowboys wide receiver CeeDee Lamb is amongst that group. The Cowboys kicked off their training camp just yesterday. They're practicing in California, I believe, and Lamb did not fly out with the team and is not expected to report. He is entering the final season of his deal. He's going to be making $18 million, and then he will be an unrestricted free agent. And for Lamb at this point, he is breaking onto the scene more and more every single season. We've seen his numbers continue to increase, and last year they reached his most recent peak where he was all-pro first team, and he led the league in receptions with 135, had about 1,700 receiving yards on the season. He was absolutely incredible. Now, he is asking for a similar contract that the Vikings gave out this offseason to their wide receiver, Justin Jefferson. And ultimately, I feel like Lamb is in that ballpark in terms of money he should be paid on this next deal. Now, I do think that Justin Jefferson is better, but at the same time, CeeDee Lamb is still just 25 years old. He has had a very clean bill of health additionally since making the jump to the NFL, and he was a massive reason why Dak Prescott had a career year last season. And ultimately, obviously, when you are playing for the Dallas Cowboys, there's all kinds of noise and scrutiny that comes with you, but I don't think that there is any denying of the talent that is CeeDee Lamb. So while you may have your feelings about the Cowboys, as a lot of people do, I think that CeeDee Lamb is absolutely worthy of getting a massive payday. Justin Jefferson signed a deal. It was early in June, I believe, and it was a 4-year, $140 million deal, which averages out to around $35 million per season. Now, that's a lot of money to be dishing out to a wide receiver. It becomes even more money in retrospect with the other ongoing contract negotiations with the Dallas Cowboys, where on top of CeeDee Lamb, they also have to pay their quarterback, Dak Prescott, and their best defensive player in linebacker / defensive end Micah Parsons. So 3 of the most important positions in the league in quarterback, wide receiver, and pass rusher, they have to dish out money to every one of them. So it becomes an increasingly difficult situation to balance all of this, as the Cowboys are obviously under an enormous amount of pressure to succeed, given that they are the Dallas Cowboys. And we've talked about it throughout the offseason. Jerry Jones obviously made his comments early on at the Senior Bowl about the idea that the Cowboys are going to be all in for this upcoming season. Now, based off of their offseason moves, that's definitely not the case. It's something that, again, was taken a little bit too seriously, I think, by a lot of media members, including myself, because we discussed it and I'm bringing it up now. But clearly, his version of whatever all in is not what we maybe pictured when he said it at first. But I was sort of in support of the Cowboys for the fact that they didn't go all in free agency. A lot of the times, yes, you can make a splash move that does improve your odds, but I feel like more times than not, we see a lot of bad contracts being handed out, overpays, in order to try and just throw money at a problem, and that doesn't necessarily work all too often. So I defended the Cowboys for not being a massive player in free agency, and especially knowing that they're going to have all of these massive contract extensions that they're going to need to get done. But we are sitting here just about a month away from the kickoff to the 2024 NFL season, and they haven't really done anything substantial this offseason in terms of using up any amount of that money that they had. They are running it back for the most part, including their head coach with Mike McCarthy, who I don't necessarily feel all too strongly as to whether or not they should have kept him or fired him. I feel like the best option for them was probably to go in a different direction there. But, outside of their defensive coordinator walking in the offseason to go and take the job with the Washington Commanders, it is a lot of the same for the Cowboys next year. And you do wonder about how this is all going to play out. Adam Schefter earlier this week, I believe it was, spoke out on one of the ESPN networks. Apologies for not having the exact name, but he talked about how he believes that Dak Prescott is going to reset the quarterback market and get over $60 million annually when that time comes. And I've been on record before saying as well, while I don't necessarily view Dak Prescott as a top 5 quarterback in the league, the Cowboys don't really have a backup plan after him. It's not like there seems to be this elite coaching infrastructure such as a Shanahan or a McVay or a McDaniel that you can feel great about them being able to improvise and work in different ways. Mike McCarthy, if the Cowboys don't have success this year, he's out. And maybe the Cowboys at that point say we don't view ourselves as serious contenders. We'll let Dak walk and maybe do some sort of a reset button situation. But that's obviously not the Cowboy way. They are trying to be competitive every single season. And to my point about the backup plan, yes, they do have Trey Lance on the roster, which is at least worth mentioning. Of course, the 3rd overall pick in 2021. But it doesn't seem great. How often have we seen somebody with the trajectory of what Trey Lance has gone through, where he has been perennially injured? Also, if you want to keep in mind the fact that he didn't even really get to play his final season in college because of COVID, that he goes basically a year without playing football in college into the NFL, where he sits the whole first season. Then he ends up getting hurt in the second game of year 2, and we haven't seen him since. He was beat out by Brock Purdy and ultimately was shipped to Dallas. I don't think that's a real plan. Now, it's somebody that, again, if the Cowboys were to press that reset button, you could at least, generate some sort of buzz that I'm sure we would hear stories from within the Cowboys organization about how they're excited to have him and that they feel like this is going to be the fresh start he needs. And I hear all of that, but it's not something that is going to really sell me on they have a great direction ahead of them. So I think they're going to need to pay Dak Prescott. I've talked about this before. CeeDee Lamb is probably in a higher tier than Dak Prescott relative to their positions and relative to the other best players at their position. But at the same time, I'm not really sure what CeeDee Lamb does for your organization if you don't have a quarterback in place. And I have real doubts about their running game as well. With Tony Pollard leaving in free agency, it seemed like the Cowboys were going to be sort of the premier example of a team that's going to go out and draft a running back this past year, and instead they don't. And this wasn't necessarily the strongest running back class that we have seen in recent years. It was viewed as one of the weaker. But instead, they just don't really have much of an identity in the running game. Who is your go-to back going to be? Now, they bring in Ezekiel Elliott during the offseason, and that's a solid move. I thought that Zeke was a good player with the Patriots this past year. He was a little bit more of a number 2 when Ramondre Stevenson was healthy, but he was still a very competent running back. But after that, it's Rico Dowell and Deuce Vaughn, and you don't really feel great about that necessarily either. They saw some departures this past offseason in terms of their offensive line, with Biotish leaving for Washington as well, seeing Tyron Smith leave for the Jets. At that point, much older, I can understand, and I have some promise in Tyler Guyton, the offensive tackle that they drafted in the first round this past year. But the Cowboys, again, it seems like they are kind of in a situation where they got to win now, and they have to get all their players on board for that. Dak Prescott is probably going to play out this year knowing that he will get more money next offseason, I would have to imagine, even if he does have a down year this season. CeeDee Lamb is going to get his money as well. It's just sort of about reining everybody in at that point and making sure that this entire Cowboys organization is committed to winning, because I think that in this NFC as well, they have a golden opportunity to try and take advantage of the fact that there aren't necessarily any juggernauts outside of, you can say, the 49ers, and I definitely think that they're the best team in the NFC, but I wouldn't say that they are untouchable. And it's going to take a lot for the Cowboys to be able to build themselves up as this legitimate contender. But at the same time, they're going to need everybody on board in order for that to be the case. And CeeDee Lamb holding out isn't a great start. Now, it's not all that unexpected. He talked about how he is looking to get his money this offseason. Micah Parsons said, worry about CD first, and then you get to me. Dak Prescott, like I just mentioned, is probably going to be okay with waiting until next offseason to get his deal. So maybe you just give out this contract in CeeDee Lamb for the sake of just getting everybody on the same page. Once again, I can't imagine CeeDee Lamb is going to turn into a bad investment from a contract perspective. Worst case, you could end up shipping him off for at least a first-round pick. Definitely, most likely more than that as well. But that is where we currently stand with CeeDee Lamb. Now, he is not the only player in the NFL to be holding out of these training camps so far. We are going to be looking across the league at some some of the biggest storylines that remain ahead of training camp, some of the holdouts, some of the medical updates in terms of some key quarterbacks such as Joe Burrow and Aaron Rodgers in terms of the injuries that they suffered last year. So we're going to be diving into that next. But before we do so, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some moosey shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are continuing to talk about NFL training camps as they have kicked off across the league for all 32 teams. We just discussed that CeeDee Lamb did not fly out with the Dallas Cowboys to join them for their training camp, but he is not alone in terms of players that are looking to hold out. Earlier this week, we talked about Jordan Love, the Green Bay Packers quarterback. He is planning on holding out of training camp as well. I think that the latest reporting is that he's technically holding in, that he will be around the team, but is not planning on being a full participant in camp just yet. Last offseason, he signed a one-year contract extension that was worth $13.5 million with a lot of incentives built into the deal. Ended up being a very team-friendly contract, and for that reason, the Packers are going to benefit from having a quarterback that is at the caliber of Jordan Love on a less expensive deal than somebody who, especially coming off of last season, would have been entering a free agency this year and would have been much more expensive to pay. Now Love feels like it is his time to get that big contract, and with an offseason that has been filled with praise for Jordan Love for the development that we saw from him over the course of the season and his ability to lead the Packers to the NFC divisional round and very easily could have been in that conference championship. I feel like Love has every right to sort of put his foot down and try and get himself a new deal. The Packers organization and their front office does seem to be optimistic that a deal will get worked out here. They seem to be supporting him as well. So I feel pretty confident that Love will be able to get a new contract this offseason. I cannot say the same, though, for Miami Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, where just this morning we got an update from Cameron Wolfe of NFL Network that Tua is going to be at training camp. He won't be a full participant during these contract negotiations. He's going to be going through individual drills and some 7-on-7s to help develop a rapport with his wide receivers for him to stay fresh as well. But he will not be going through any types of contact drills or 11-on-11s as he is trying to, I believe that the sentiment is that he wants to make sure that he is completely healthy and that nothing were to go wrong for him in what is going to be a crucial contract year for Tua, because where the negotiations have been so far, he is hoping to reach that Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff number of $50 million a year annually. And the Dolphins don't necessarily view him in that same light. I do tend to sort of side with the Dolphins a little bit on this one. I think that playing this out could be the way to go. So ultimately, we'll see how this all plays out for Tua, but just know that it is a little bit of a hold-in situation, but again, still doing some limited participation, and I can't imagine that this holdout goes into the regular season, but we will have to keep you all updated on that one. Another player that we've talked about at length before here, Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers. He did end up reporting to training camp yesterday. Seems like it's going to be a similar type of hold-in situation. I'm assuming that we are going to get some more details on all of that as things come out. I think the 49ers just kicked off their training camp yesterday as well, so we'll see what level of participation Ayuk plays with, because he just last week formally requested a trade after an offseason full of him hinting at the idea that he is sort of fed up with the organization's negotiation tactics, and that he's been not so quietly hinting that he wants out. A lot of love for Jaden Daniels. And it's not just love for Jaden Daniels, who was just drafted second overall by the Washington Commanders this past year. You can show love and have it be, no harm. But at the same time, when you look at the way that Ayuk has gone about it, his former college quarterback, he seems a little bit excited about the possibility of him ending up with Daniels at some point in his career. Now, 49ers general manager John Lynch sort of continued with the same sentiment that he has been preaching over the course of this offseason, that Ayuk is an extremely meaningful part of this organization, and their hope is that he remains with them for this season and that they can sort of smooth things out there. Didn't necessarily commit to any sort of a long-term deal. Feels like Ayuk is going to play out the final year of his contract, and they aren't going to be able to strike a deal this offseason. We'll see where that leads to next year. Maybe it's them giving him a big contract and them potentially cutting ties. It's interesting because they just have a lot of talented receivers, the 49ers do, between Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and they just drafted Ricky Pearsall in the first round this past year. So you have to imagine at least one of them is gone headed into the 2025 season. But as for this year, I am fully confident that the 49ers are going to at least be able to get on the same page with Ayuk and have him be available for them throughout the course of this year. So that's enough on some of the holdout conversations. We do have some, more positive and encouraging stories as well, with a couple very important quarterbacks, starting with Aaron Rodgers, of course, of the New York Jets. He finally reports to training camp. He missed the mandatory, it was OTAs or whatever the official technical term with it was, but I think it was mandatory minicamp that he missed for his trip to Egypt. It seems like now that he's back in the building, he has no regrets about what he did, that he was in communication with his teammates and Robert Saleh throughout the course of it. But, as much as I thought it was a weird move, I haven't really talked about it on this show just yet. It was pretty strange for him to, at this point in his career, he understands that there only is a few years left, especially coming off of a torn Achilles. He has made more than enough money throughout the course of his career that he is going to be able to go on whatever trips he wants as things move on here. But the decision to go to Egypt, and look, he took full responsibility. He said he understood what was coming to him, and ultimately, as long as he performs on the football field, it's no big deal. But was definitely an interesting decision from him, and Rodgers has never been afraid to make interesting statements or do interesting things, so it's kind of all is normal to some degree for Aaron Rodgers there. But The other news that we got in regards to quarterbacks coming back from injuries is that Joe Burrow has been cleared to be a full participant at training camp. This isn't necessarily a massive surprise. We've known that this is likely going to be the case for some time, but it's still definitely encouraging for Bengals fans where their entire season kind of relies on Joe Burrow. As soon as he went down with that injury last year, it was just about over. Now they were still able to win 9 games on the year, and they were at least competitive for a playoff spot by the end of it. But it was just so clear that especially, and this year, we just talked about the Bengals earlier this week. I do think that their defense is going to be improved. They added some veterans into that secondary, which should be massively important because their defense just was not good enough last year. Their run game, there's still a lot to be desired there. Joe Burrow is sort of the heart of the Bengals, and everything does feel a lot smoother when he is in there and he is available. So ultimately, he will be there, and it should be, an improved season for the Bengals this year. And then the last training camp storyline I want to touch on is the quarterback battle for the Pittsburgh Steelers, where this is where we're going to get a little bit more insight into where that battle between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields stands. The Steelers went out and acquired both of them in the offseason. It was a free agent signing of Russell Wilson. It was a trade for Justin Fields. 2 quarterbacks that were starters last season, and there are a handful of doubts with both of them, but we also know that there is a lot of upside. Specifically Justin Fields, you feel like last year was the best season of his career, and it was maybe seeming like he could establish himself as a true starting quarterback. Russell Wilson, on the other hand, definitely on the decline, but at the same time, somebody who has won a Super Bowl, has been to another one, and is a veteran presence for this Steelers team that definitely needs it, because last year the quarterback play was just far too inconsistent between Kenny Pickett. Mitch Trubisky started a game or two as well in there, and ultimately Mason Rudolph was the one who took over down the stretch of the season into the playoffs. And you just, especially in this AFC, you cannot rely on somebody. No offense, Mason Rudolph, but you can't win a playoff game. You can't come out of the AFC with that being your quarterback situation. So we are actually going to be diving deeper into the conversation surrounding the Pittsburgh Steelers and what's going on with that training camp battle of Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. But first, we are going to be taking a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are continuing to preview all 32 NFL teams for the upcoming season, and we have our last team of the AFC North today in the Pittsburgh Steelers. And like we were talking about just before the break, the quarterback battle is probably the biggest story with the Steelers this year, where last season it was far too inadequate and inconsistent play from the quarterback position. Now, I definitely am of the belief that Matt Canada was definitely holding back Kenny Pickett and that offensive group for a lot of the year. But even despite that, it was clear that an upgrade was needed to be made, and ultimately the Steelers kind of went a couple different routes all at once in order to try and fix that problem, as they signed Russell Wilson to a very cheap contract. I believe it was officially went down as a veteran minimum deal, and they went out and traded for Justin Fields, another asset that there was very little market for, and they ended up picking up two guys that have a good amount of starting quarterback experience, Wilson more so than Fields, but Fields still been the starter for the past few years and is coming off of the best season of his career. And ultimately, you feel like somewhere in there could be an answer. Now, I don't think that either one of them is the definitive answer. I know that Russell Wilson was, some of the raw stats with him in Denver don't look all that bad, but I'm just kind of trusting my eyes on this one, that Russell Wilson, clearly is a diminished version of himself. And I'm not saying that it's impossible to win with him, because Wilson was keeping the Broncos in contention for a playoff spot, but there's also more to it than that. The Broncos ended up going on this winning streak. It was from week 7 to 12, where they won 5 straight games. They won 6 of 7 games from week 7 to 14. But ultimately, and Wilson did a good enough job of just managing the game, which might be all the Steelers need at this point. But he doesn't feel like somebody who still has it in him to raise his ceiling. During that winning streak, the Broncos were very reliant on a little bit of an unheard of turnover differential, where they won the turnover battle in weeks 7 through 12 by 13 in those 5 straight wins. So, they were averaging just over 2 more turnovers than the other takeaways, I should say, than the other team during that stretch. That's not something that you can bank on as being a reliable thing. Now, again, Wilson could be just managing a game, and with the Steelers team, that might be enough. But I feel like we've seen a lot of Wilson praise this offseason. It's not that I want to take that away from him, but it's that I do have real concerns. Now, that being said, he is very likely to be the better week 1 option in comparison to Justin Fields, but we're going to have to see how this season plays out. And there is also kind of a lot of unproven at the receiver position, where you can look at Wilson last year and no, the Broncos didn't have an elite group, but it was Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, and some promise from a rookie in Marvin Mims. That's about the level of wide receiver play I think you'll be getting with the Steelers this year, where George Pickens is their number 1 guy, who they took a couple years ago. They signed Van Jefferson in the offseason, who is a little bit more of a veteran presence. And then they're going to have to hope to some degree that Roman Wilson, their 3rd round selection out of Michigan, is able to break out for them. So it's a solid core, and I do like their tight ends as well. When you look at Freiermuth, and last year Darnell Washington ended up being a pretty nice development for them, but ultimately it is, I would say, a middling receiving core. Now, like I said, it's a question as to who is going to start week 1 for them. I believe on day 1, and we'll get more answers to this as training camp moves on here, but Russell Wilson is probably going to be the week 1 starter. But Justin Fields is in a very interesting situation, where if Wilson does sort of fall apart on them and Fields is able to show some sort of promise down the stretch of the year, then the final stretch of the year, then maybe he could be their long-term answer at quarterback. But it's a lot of ifs in that statement, so we will have to see there. Ultimately, when you look at their offensive numbers from last year, one of the biggest things I think going in their favor is the fact that they did get 2 quarterbacks that have a semi-similar play style in Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. if for nothing, at least the mobility aspect. And I feel like to some degree, Justin Fields is definitely stronger in that category, but at the same time, Russell Wilson had his most rush attempts in a season this past year since 2020. So, Wilson at this point is just looking to reestablish himself as a starting quarterback. I'm sure he would be willing to do whatever it takes to that degree. And there's already a pretty good running back combination in the backfield with Najee Harris and with Jaylen Warren. So I think that they could definitely rely on that to some degree. Now, the offensive line is very unproven, where they've addressed it in the past couple drafts with Troy Fautanu in the first round this year, Zach Frazier in the second round. Frazier, I think, was a great pickup for them. They took Broderick Jones in the first round last year, who had I would say, mostly an underwhelming season, to be perfectly candid, but at the same time, Jones could see an increased role and could just be better in year 2. He didn't end up becoming the full-time starting tackle until week 8. He was fine. He had his growing pains. Hopefully, I was a fan of him coming out of college, so I would expect him to improve this upcoming year, but definitely a lot of youth and unproven entities on that offensive line, so we'll see there. But last year, that was sort of their strength, if there was one, offensively. Looking at their defense, the stats don't necessarily jump off of the page, but they were, I thought, very good. And part of that reason is because they were a little bit of the bend, don't break strategy. Also, for whatever it's worth, I don't think that their offense did them very many favors at all, where they were on the field for the majority of the games that they played in. And I think that if the offense can just be more competent, we are going to inherently see improved performance from that defense. TJ Watt is one of the best defensive players in the league. He's won a defensive player of the year. You can argue that he's been robbed of one or two more. I'm not going to get into that argument myself, but he is phenomenal. Alex Highsmith has emerged as another very impressive pass rusher to complement him on the other side. I liked the additions that they made this offseason to their linebacking core, where they went out and signed Patrick Queen to a deal in free agency, and also sneakily drafted Peyton Watson pretty late in this draft. I think it was a day 2 pick, maybe in round 3, but Peyton Wilson played football at NC State. I think when fully healthy, he has the potential to be a legitimate plus starter on this Steelers defense. Now, injuries are a very big part of the story with Peyton Wilson. We will see, but I think that he can absolutely, especially in this environment in Pittsburgh, become a real playmaker for them. In the secondary, again, kind of a situation where there is some unproven. Would do wonders for them if Joey Porter does make the leap that a lot of people are anticipating. Porter last year was sort of handicapped by the fact that he was not a very strong tackler. That was his reputation, and because of it, it cost him playing time out on the field. Now, hopefully year 2, that part of his game is at least not a total liability, that he can start to emerge as a true lockdown corner. Outside of that, I don't love their corners necessarily. They do bring back Cam Sutton, who was with the Steelers before, but ended up having a brief little stint there with the Lions last season. So that could be a solid addition for them for sure. They traded for Dante Jackson in that deal that sent out, it was Deontay Johnson during the offseason as well. Dante Jackson, not a bad cornerback. You have Minka Fitzpatrick at the very back of that secondary playing the free safety position. So ultimately, I'm not in love with their secondary, but you can't say that they're a bottom tier group by any means. And again, with the pass rush that the Steelers defense is able to put on opposing quarterbacks, I think they are more than capable of holding their own. But looking at the Steelers season the Steelers' schedule for the upcoming season, you'll notice specifically on the back half of the year, you have a ton of very difficult opponents. I would say from week 11 to week 18, there is not a game you can point to and say that the Steelers are definitively going to win that game. According to Sharp Football Analysis, they have the Steelers' schedule rated as the hardest one in the NFL this year. And again, you just look as it's sort of that playoff crunch time, you have a lot of division opponents, even some of your out-of-division opponents. I mean, they have to play the Eagles on the road in week 15. They're going to get the Chiefs in week 17. It is just an incredibly loaded back half of the schedule. So in order for them to have a hope to make the playoffs this year, they're going to have to take advantage during those numbers of the first few weeks. And even then, I don't know if you can necessarily point to some of those out-of-division games and guarantee them as wins. I'm looking at Atlanta on the road in week 1, against the Chargers in week 3, even at Indy in week 4. I mean, those aren't total rollover games there that they're going to have to take advantage early on in the year. That's where Russell Wilson's experience is probably going to come to play, because the Steelers aren't going to have time to maybe work Justin Fields into it, treat him as a project, and hope that he can be soaring by the end of the season, because they have to take advantage of some of those weaker opponents early on. As for my prediction for their record this season, I have them going 9-8. Their over-under line is at 8.5. I was going back and forth between 8 and 9 wins, and ultimately it just came down to the fact that with this Steelers organization, with Mike Tomlin in charge, I don't believe that the Steelers are going to go sub 500. And we have seen 17 straight years of Tomlin giving them 500 ball or better, and they won 10 games last year with the disaster that was that offense. Again, the schedule is going to be extremely difficult for them, which is why I do have my concerns, but ultimately I think they squeak out that 9th win, and we'll see whether or not it is enough for a playoff spot. Looking at where we're at in terms of my personal predictions, they are going to be in the same realm as a lot of these other teams, especially their division opponents. I have all 4 of the AFC North players being 500 or better for another year. That was the case last year as well. They're going to be battling it out, absolutely. It's going to be close down the end there. You have to hope that whoever is playing quarterback is going to be able to keep up with some of those offenses that the Steelers are going to be facing down the stretch of the year. They're likely going to be able to rely on their defense a good amount. And again, they just need stability. And if that's the case, I feel like with Mike Tomlin and that defense, they're going to be able to produce a winning season. But let me know what your thoughts are on the Steelers' upcoming season in the comment section. A team that I feel like a lot of NFL fans can be a little volatile on what the expectations for them are. But we are going to be actually sticking in the city of Pittsburgh for our next segment, because across town there is a legend in the making with Paul Skeens of the Pittsburgh Pirates, who last night was able to pitch into the 9th inning for the first time of his young career in what ended up being a loss for the Pirates, but he just continues to be a phenomenon. So we are going to be diving into all of that, but first, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are going to be shifting gears a little bit into the MLB. We just talked about the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're going to be sticking in Pittsburgh with the Pirates because last night Paul Skeens made his first start post All-Star break, where he was the starter in the All-Star game, and he ended up pitching a career-high 8 1/3 innings in what ended up being the first loss of his career so far. 2 starts in a row where he has not gotten very much run support. This game was just coming off of the outing that he had before the All-Star break, where Skeens was shoving a no-hitter through the first 7 innings, and Pittsburgh manager Derek Shelton ended up facing a lot of backlash because he decided to pull Skeens from that outing. At that point, though, it was a 1-0 game, sort of similar to the situation last night where there was not very much offensive production from this Pittsburgh lineup, and ultimately he did decide to let Skeens roll in this one. And I was really glad, at least for the 8th inning, that we were able to see him there, and I still thought it was cool that we saw him in the 9th, but I thought that it was going to be a situation where we did see him get pulled at that last minute because of the fact that when we were going into the 9th inning, it was a 1-1 ball game. We saw the Pirates able to score their 1 run of the evening in the bottom of that 8th, so ultimately there was a little bit of momentum going on. It seemed like it could have been an incredible opportunity for Skeens to get his first ever complete game. Now, ultimately, that didn't end up being the case. He allowed a leadoff double in that 9th inning that ended up coming back to hurt him. And ultimately, Alec Burleson was able to drive in Siani, who has just a ton of speed, and it ends off on a little bit of a sour note for what was an incredible showing for him, but still Skeens has nothing to feel bad about. His final line, 8 1/3 innings pitched, 8 strikeouts, 4 hits, 0 walks, and 2 earned runs. It was Nolan Arenado that got the best of him in the 5th inning, where he went yard there for a solo shot. And again, it was just sort of 2 bad pitches, is I believe the way that Shelton specifically described it. It was the one in the 5th to Arenado, and it was that one in the 9th inning for Siani to get the double. Now, initially, it was a pretty close play as well in that 9th inning where Siani was coming into second base, and ultimately Reynolds got a really good throw in. The umpire initially called Siani out at second, but ultimately they reviewed it. It was overturned, and then again, with the top of the lineup coming out, Burleson was just able to drive him in, and that ended the night for Skeens in what is another chapter in what has been extremely impressive up to this point. It actually raised his ERA slightly. He's rocking a 1.93 ERA so far this season. Just incredible numbers across the board. Where you want strikeouts, he'll give you 11.7 per 9. His whip is sub 1, just .871. Everything that you could really ask of him, he has. Now, the long ball has been what has hurt him. 1 home run per 9. Not that that's a crazy number by any means, but when we've seen Skeens get hurt, it is by that long ball, which tends to happen sometimes when you are a strikeout pitcher. But what was crazy to me last night about his performance was the fact that he was kind of, despite the fact that he had the 8 strikeouts, and it didn't really feel like it was one of those dominant, Skeens is striking everybody out. He got out of a number of different innings on a pretty low pitch count. I think that he was headed into 90 pitches going into that 9th inning. I mean, he was cruising from a pitch count perspective while also maintaining those high strikeout numbers. I believe out of his 12 starts. It's something along the lines of he's struck out at least 7 batters in 11 of those. So he just continues to be so impressive, as the Pirates are, a fun team this year. They're 51-50. They are a couple games back out of the wild card spot. Unfortunately, a tough team to blow it to, where they are competing with the Cardinals for some of those final wild card spots. As things currently stand, the Pirates are 1.5 games behind the Mets for that final spot. Obviously, a lot of season to go. Will be important to see. I think they're actually playing right now, if I'm not mistaken. The Pirates are up 5-0 right now on the Cardinals in the top of the 8th inning. So the Pirates, again, I said this when we were coming out of the All-Star break, I'm just hoping to see them playing meaningful baseball down the stretch of the year. Pirates are a team that I feel like could be a little bit of America's team vibes, just in terms of the fact that it's an organization that is a small market that has been, it seems like at least these past couple years showing this early promise early on, and you get excited about them, and it's been sort of dwindling away. But where the Pirates currently are with the rotation that they currently have, obviously dealing with a little bit of injuries on that front, but they are going to be a player down the stretch of this year. Now, obviously, we've talked about it before, the dynamic bats are kind of what they're missing, so I am curious to see. I mean, we hear so much about these big market teams, the Yankees, the Mets, the Red Sox, the Dodgers. Are these the types of teams that are going to go out and buy? I feel like the Pirates would be an interesting conversation to sort of slide in there as well. Now, I'm not saying that I expect that out of them by any means, but it would be a very interesting thing to see how it plays out. Just imagine, out of all of these teams that are clamoring for the likes of a Vladimir Guerrero Jr., if he just ends up on the Pirates, I mean, that would, I think, make them, one of the most fun teams, considering the fact that they have all of these starting pitcher arms outside of O'Neal Cruz. And yes, they still do have other good players, don't get me wrong, but they don't necessarily have quite as much of these young bats that get you extremely excited. Nick Gonzalez is in the midst of having a very nice season as well. He was actually the one. He came up short earlier in the game yesterday in a bases loaded situation where he grounded out, and the Pirates weren't able to score then. But in the 8th, it was him who stepped up big for them, and was able to drive in their one run of the game. Just 25 years old, so promise there. Would be nice to see if Davis was ever able to get himself together, where Davis was the number 1 overall pick in 2021. I can double check that. No, 2000, sooner than that. It was 2021. Henry Davis was the first overall pick, and he just hasn't really been available for them in the majors because of his struggles. He is somebody that if he were to emerge for the Pirates, it would be a big time revelation as to what the future of the franchise looks like. But that just hasn't really been the case. He's currently in the minors right now, and still young, I believe just 24 years old, but turning 25 soon. Would love to see him round the corner for the Pirates. But let me know what your thoughts are on the Pirates' postseason chances and whether or not you see them being able to put together any type of a run. But we're going to be taking our final break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we have some recent developments in the ongoing media rights negotiations with the NBA, where TNT is trying to make a final push to keep themselves on the air, the beloved Inside the NBA, trying to stay alive here. So we will dive into all of that. But first, our last break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be diving into the current situation surrounding the media rights negotiation of the NBA. I feel like we have never really seen, or at least me personally, I've never really seen so much public support for a sports talk show and personalities. It seems like typically we tend to kind of hate everything, but in terms of the TNT crew, we've been hearing for just about a year now that their rights for NBA broadcasting are definitely in jeopardy. And there's been a lot of public outcry for Warner Brothers, who owns TNT, to make a move and make sure that that's not the case. And ultimately, we saw a couple weeks ago the NBA beginning the process of trying to finalize their media mega deal. Ends up, I think the total deal that they signed for was 11 years worth $76 billion. And it, of course, notably did not include TNT. It had Disney, NBC, and Amazon. And TNT is trying to make another push here where Warner Brothers have matched the offer that was made by Amazon Prime to try and retain their rights. Now, basically, the annual breakdown of the deal that the NBA is trying to finalize is that Disney will pay $2.6 billion, NBC will pay $2.5 billion, and Amazon will pay $1.8 billion. So that rounds out to about $7 billion per season for the NBA, and TNT is trying to remain, granted, the smallest portion of that deal, trying to take what Amazon is currently paying in the 1.8, but to be able to still remain in the atmosphere of the NBA. And like I mentioned, TNT has been beloved by basketball fans from the inside the NBA personalities with Shaq and Kenny and Charles Barkley and Ernie Smith. And I believe that they also have two of the best announcers, commentators in basketball as well, with Kevin Harlan and Ian Eagles. So I definitely am in favor of inside the NBA staying together and being able to continue out here. I know there have been some people that say, well, maybe inside the NBA could just be essentially bought out by another organization. Ernie has expressed interest in the fact that he doesn't plan on leaving Warner Brothers, so that would already probably be without him. Charles Barkley said that if TNT loses NBA, his plan is to retire after this season. So as much as it's a nice thought that we could potentially find a way for, the TNT crew all to stay together, if it's not with Warner Brothers, it's probably not going to be the case. So as things currently stands, like I mentioned, TNT and Warner Brothers have matched the Amazon Prime price of $1.5 billion annually, but even still, the reporting is that Adam Silver and the NBA are preferring, or at least their preference as things currently stand, is with Amazon. And I'm trying to think why that would be. We are seeing these exclusively streamed networks try and make their way into the world of sports. We've seen Peacock, Amazon Prime are really the main two, but even still, if you go with Roku or Apple TV, we see all of these more exclusive games, and I'm kind of trying to decipher why it would be that the NBA would prefer an organization like Amazon as opposed to a public access channel such as TNT. And obviously, it's no secret in the NBA and really across every one of the major sports, it's always just about revenue for the commissioners here. And I'm not really sure. I would love to have it explained to me why, if both organizations were willing to pay $1.5 billion, why the NBA would prefer the exclusive streaming service. I wonder if it would have to do with partnerships and such, and just the way that maybe they feel more confident in Amazon being able to retain the money to be able to cover for the next 11 years, because you're not just signing year by year. The commitment is for 11 seasons, and maybe it is more the NBA having more confidence in Amazon than it is Warner Brothers, but I'm not really sure. Definitely feel free to throw out your thoughts on that predicament in the comment section. But now we've seen TNT sort of, this would be a massive hit for them if they do end up losing the NBA, and they are trying to also pivot and have some backup plans in case things don't work out with the NBA. The names of some of the events that they are planning on taking over. The NHL is introducing this Four Nations face-off and hoping that becomes an annual event where it is basically just a hockey tournament with NHL players, and it is having four of the biggest countries in the world in terms of hockey face off against one another. It is the United States, Sweden, Canada, and Finland. Now, this tournament will take off officially next February in 2025, so we have some time for that. This is going to be this year's inaugural event, and we'll see sort of what the long-term future looks like for that, but TNT is hoping to establish themselves there. I also feel like TNT has a phenomenal hockey crew as well during the Stanley Cup playoffs we saw. So that would be, pretty fun. I think that they are cut out well to be able to cover that. They are also committing to the French Open for the next 10 years starting in 2025. They have college basketball in the Big East for both men and women for, I believe it is 6 years, starting in the 2025-26 season. And then starting, I believe this fall, is their coverage of the Mountain West Conference for college football. So, they have a list of other events that are at least still relevant and that they're holding on to, and that I do believe they can do a good job with. But again, the NBA coverage on TNT is to some degree what should be almost the gold standard of these types of shows, specifically in regards to pre and post game shows, the halftime analysis, all of those things, where it's a combination of, it's not too many people, you give a lot of insights, you have extremely entertaining banter between that group. I mean, the chemistry with the four of them is just, untouchable, really, and it just sort of makes to be as perfect of a product as you can get in today's atmosphere. And ultimately, I don't have high expectations for them being able to pull this off. Now, I think that it would be to the joy of the majority of basketball fans if they do find a way to make this happen, but I wouldn't necessarily be holding your breath for it, because if the NBA is really so fixated on making money and they do prefer the Amazon package, then there might just be nothing that TNT can do at that point. But definitely let me know what your thoughts on the situation are in the comment section. But that is all that we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet.